I just said I'm getting nervous because typically when we do trainings, we have 10 to 20 people. That's my preferred size. 15 people is the perfect spot. And having more people here in the room is really different, essentially. What also makes me nervous is I got a bottle of gin, and it's a desk, and I wonder why people from Scalefree are rolling up there all the time, right? So let's see if it's there still when I'm come back. All right. I want to talk about AI-driven business, and today is really where a circle closes, maybe not of my life, but of my career at least. I want to talk about I want to get started with data-driven organizations and how we apply Data Vault in a data-driven organization, essentially, for this purpose. But then I want to talk about AI in a Data Vault architecture, and how we used it back then, a couple of years ago, and how we can use it nowadays, essentially. That's my goal for today's session, essentially. So when we define data-driven organizations, I found a good, essentially, definition by the IPAC Business School. The term data-driven describes any organization that is data-driven or data-centric. A data-driven company uses data analysis technologies to guide its organization. And here's the key: strategic decisions are then based on data rather than intuition or gut feeling, experience, or the external environment. So that's where we should be nowadays, or where people strive to get, essentially. For Scalefree, that means we are data-driven by heart, essentially. And if people come to me and say, you know what, I have this great idea, my gut feeling says that, I would send them to a doctor, to be honest. Because if your gut feeling tells you something, it's typically something related to sicknesses, typically. I come back to that because I also have a gut feeling here. I come back to that a bit later. But that's the idea. So Scalefree is really data-driven. I mean, it's founded by Dan and me, two data-driven guys. What would you expect, essentially, right? Now, there are different approaches for how we can model the Data Vault, and you know Data Vault, so you most probably are familiar with these approaches here. We have the logical modeling on the lower left corner, where people model the business as it should be. We have customers, we have products, customers purchase products. That's how the world should be, essentially. But then you look at the raw data, and there's all these gaps and dirty data and all this nonsense, essentially, right? So then people say, well, you know what? If that doesn't work, if this logical model doesn't work for us, maybe let's go for the other extreme opposite, the source vault, where we just model the raw data and ignore the business completely. In the hub, the primary key of the source table, well, first of all, for every source table, you have a hub. And then the primary key of the source table becomes the business key in the hub. Foreign keys lead to links, problem solved, right? Well, the problem is that if the primary keys are surrogate keys or technical IDs, and those will not integrate. So you have an integration problem, essentially. What we teach and preach here is essentially the data-driven approach. And that's the middle ground, if you want. We model the data, as the raw data, actually. We model the raw data as it's being used by the business. And that's a reference to the business key. And that integrates the data sets, essentially, across multiple systems, essentially. That's the basic idea. So you should be familiar with these flavors, essentially. I believe we see this sheet many times. The cool thing now is when you follow this data-driven approach, it's very close to a schema-on-read approach that we know from Hadoop environments, essentially, where we essentially put data on a data lake, and when we query it out, we apply the target schema. And think about this: when you look at the Data Vault design, in a data-driven design, you have the raw Data Vault. We don't apply any business logic. We just restructure it. We creatively, I like to say, we creatively destruct the data, so we can load it as quick as possible into the database page, and then are able to reconstruct or to derive any target model from it. That's the basic idea. And when you think about this, when you visualize everything, when you visualize your business rules, your information mart, when you query your information mart, the SQL optimizer will then merge the statement against the dimension with the statement inside the view of the dimension, with the statement of the business vault entities, and run against the Data Vault. It applies the target schema while reading it out. So it follows one-to-one schema-on-read approaches, essentially. And that's how we build these Data Vault designs, essentially. That's what we promote here in trainings, in books, in articles, in our consulting practice, and so on. Works like a charm for us, works for our customers, and that's the approach we use. Now, how do we use AI? And here's where the circle starts. So before I met Dan in 2011, I went to a bootcamp training in Vermont. There's a longer story. I got forced into this training. That's a side story of my former boss back then. And so I went to this training. Before I met Dan, people explained me the Data Vault as a logical design. customers purchase products. That's what we model essentially. And I was like, no, why should I use data vault? Why should I use hub-sync satellites if I have an image style design for this, right? You have people for that and so on. But then I realized in the training, data was actually data-driven. And that fit much better to my education. I went to, here in a school in Bingen, where I did software engineering classes essentially. I was angewandte Informatik, applied computer science. And then I got my master's from Santa Clara University, where we did a lot of research on data mining and data-driven approaches. And so the data vault all of a sudden fit into my education, what I received beforehand, and now it made sense to me, and that's when I jumped on the ship, essentially. And some people knew what I was doing at Santa Clara University. We were essentially, we did research on, we distributed neural networks on MPP clusters to classify unstructured data. So I'm a text mining specialist. And that's what I did before I founded Scalefree, essentially. Lots of data mining, MPP stuff, and so on. And then when I met Dan, I liked the data topic because I had a problem. Back in 2010, 2011, people didn't really think about data mining because the data was so bad, or they didn't have the data available, readily available for doing data mining. That was the biggest problem we faced. So I skipped the data mining idea to a bit, and I jumped on the data vault ship and started doing data vault. For me, the difference between data mining and data vault is really about data mining is technically, if you go down on an algorithm level, and we researched the algorithm, so we had to understand the algorithm line by line, essentially, it's very complicated, but it's only a piece of code, 10 lines. But super complicated, 10, 20 lines of code. While in data vault, it's compared to data mining, relatively simple, but lots of patterns. So lots of different patterns, how to model certain circumstances and so on. Lots of patterns you have to learn, essentially. And that was a big difference, but for me it was the first step to get the data ready, and then you can do some data mining with it. That was my basic idea when we started with it. Yeah, so that was the starting point. But some people knew that I was actually having some data mining experience. Well, some. And they asked me a lot of questions, actually. How can you apply data mining in the data vault architecture? And yeah, that's a slide for the what I just explained, essentially. No, they were asking me a lot of questions. Could you essentially feed some data from a data warehouse, from a data vault, into AI models? We saw this today with Data Vault Builder, with the knowledge pattern, essentially. So how can you feed data into an AI pattern, AI model, for example? Where does the model, data mining model, fit? Is it part of the raw data vault? Is it part of the information mart? Does it belong to the business vault? Where does it fit? Where do you put the data mining model to, essentially? In which layer, essentially? Or could you use data mining approaches to maybe generate parts of the data vault? Could you identify business keys, for example, right? Lots of discussions for years and decades now, how to find the right business keys for customers and products and so on. In my first data vault project, we spent 4 months trying to figure out what is the business key for customers, without realizing that we had different people in the room, where they were using different business source systems, essentially, and there was no clear answer. We had to use multiple business keys. Well, that was before I went to a training and before I started with my data vault journey. I was a junior in the room and didn't know anything about data vaults, and they discussed business keys for customers. So could we speed this up by using AI somehow to identify those business keys? Could we assist maybe the data modeler by coming up with parts of the model, maybe the hubs or links, the satellites, something like that, coming up as part of the model, generating that with AI? Those questions I received back in 2013, 2014, roughly. And honestly, I ignored them. Well, not all of them, but on the bottom part here, the business keys and part of the model, I ignored those because back in 2012, 2013, 14, I was still learning data vault, all these different patterns, how to apply them, I applied them in project and so on. So it was not the right time for me. Sure, I knew how to answer the first 2 questions. How can we feed data into an AI model? That's information mart. We nowadays call them interface marts. So we have a structure where we define interface, maybe a feature store, and feed the data just like we would do with an information mart. We come up with the feature store and then feed the data into the AI model, for example, standard approach. Or where does the model fit? That's essentially where I would place it in the business vault. And that's from a pure data vault perspective. An AI model is just business logic, right? And the best place would be the business vault. You could also place it in information mart, but then it's less reusable. So it's the same concept apply for data mining models than for ordinary business rules from a pure data vault perspective. The only difference is it's typically external scripts. So you have some external scripts for, let's say, some Python scripts or Revit Miner jobs where you run these data mining models, but then you write back the results of the data mining of the model back into the business world. It's just results you produce from a business logic, essentially. That's the basic idea. So that's what we would do and what we've done with particular customers starting in 2013, 2014, all the way back then, essentially. And that's how we applied data mining in a data vault architecture, essentially. That's the basic idea. So relatively straightforward. But then I also, to some extent, realized a fundamental problem in big data, but that's one thing, but also got some triggers. So somebody asked me a question again, can you generate parts of the data vault using AI? And then I thought about this. I started thinking about this 5 or 6 years ago, and I realized that there's a fundamental problem, first of all. My first question is, why would you do this? Why would you start modeling a raw data vault using AI? Kind of obvious, but why would you do this? Well, the first thing is, there is, in my opinion, a fundamental problem. Think about this. We have a exponential growth of data volume, right? So we all learned this in school, and it's already known for years and decades maybe, that the volume of data goes up. But the same is true, and there's only a bit of research, but the same is true, and when we think about this, the same is true also for data shape. The more data volume we process, it also comes with data shape. More tables, more columns, and so on. So years ago, you had a couple of tables in your data warehouse. Now you have hundreds, right? The data shape goes up as well with the data volume. So it's also exponential, actually. And there's some research on this. Not much, but you find those. So that's number one. But then when you look at who should all process this data shape, you realize we don't have people, right? There's some people coming out of the universities who become data scientists, but they also replace retirees. Because people can't work until forever, right? So they have to retire one day. Yes, Francesco, you as well. And but we have to retire one day, and who should replace us? Well, sure, new students or new graduates. But there's only a number of seats available in universities, and there's only a number of universities available where they produce new graduates in the data science field, right? So there's a gap, and this gap is widening, essentially. More data shape to be processed, and we are unable to deal with this. And we need some scalable solution. Well, one solution might be to say, to solve this problem, we need more babies. So let's produce more babies, essentially. However, they must become data scientists, okay? So they can't become pilots and dentists or what else. They must become data scientists. My gut says that's a good idea. Well, let's take a look at the numbers. Because you would say, well, makes sense. There's an exponential growth in human mankind, so there's more and more people coming up, so let's build some more universities, some more programs. Should work. It should be all scalable to some extent, or exponentially. The problem is the red line here. That's the growth rate of population. And that, since the 50s of the last century, goes down. And that's a problem, because that means, and that's an easy forecast, that we will peak in around 2086. That's when the population in the world will go down, actually. That's already, you can forecast this relatively easily, essentially. And that's a problem. So no, it doesn't work. It's not a solution. Having more babies, first of all, people don't have more babies because they are getting more wealthy and they have less kids, and that's what it is. So that solution, even my gut feeling said, yeah, good idea. Nope, it's not a good idea. It's actually a bad idea. And again, where are the universities? Where are the data scientists coming out of the programs? So in my opinion, the only solution is AI. We have to solve this problem with AI, because otherwise we can't deal with the increasing data shape and the data volume, essentially. So there he is again. And we saw some ideas and some solutions already from Oyvind, where he essentially, I'll come back to you, where he built some LLM for assisting the user. From Francesco, where he essentially fed models or data into an LLM. There's some other solutions out there, Sol BI, so Francesco, your space becomes a bit packed, actually, in information mart. There's some solutions where you can also use an LLM to query the system and build dashboards, for example. Give me all the revenues in Belgium for the last years. You get a line chart, essentially, or some bar chart. And so I had some trigger again. I was starting working, actually, on a, let's say, pet project, side project initially. Flow BI, I come back to that one. Yeah, no, it's okay. So here's the thing. So the idea sticked. So I got a new trigger, essentially, a couple of years ago, 5-6 years ago. Again, the question, can't we generate parts of the data vault design using AI? And then I started thinking about this because I knew all the patterns now. I learned all the data vault stuff, so it was all there. And I tried it all of them. And then I started thinking about this. I remember the flight where I was flying back from some conference. And I was starting my thinking process. And my thinking process was more or less like, what if it's possible that you have a data platform where you can just attach a data set, like using JDBC drivers or something, right? Just attach some data source, and the system will do all the job by itself. Analyze the data, come with the raw data model, essentially. If that's possible, how would you build this? And then I started, honestly, for 2 years, side by side doing my consulting gigs, thinking about how to build this. And then I had some rough idea how to build such a system. But then it's a difference if you have an idea to really start the idea. So I had some other trigger event that caused me to call up some friends and really ask them, hey, I have this idea, high risk, you want to join? And sure, these guys joined. So we started doing research on actual data sets for a year, more or less. And after a year, we had some Python script that actually worked. So we had some pattern how we could derive a raw data vault with all the hub sync satellites, with the business keys, with everything essentially from the data sets. And then we started building the product. And that's Flowbia. It's a service essentially where you can attach your data sources, come with the raw data vault, and generate the code. Well, not generate the code, I'll come back to that. The idea is that we produce a logical model. We don't create the physical model. We don't define the create table statements, the insert statements. We just, in quotes, we just define for your actual data what are the hubs, the links, the satellites to be used, what are the business keys, what are the satellite splits, non-uses data, and reference data. And so that's what we essentially define as metadata, and then hand it over to other applications, to the existing applications in the market. Data Vault Builder is a partner. We have a webinar tomorrow where we present essentially the integration between Flowbia and Data Vault Builder, how we feed the model from Flowbia into Data Vault Builder. There's Data Vault for DBT package from Scalefree, where we also have an integration more or less ready. It's about to be published essentially. Where we also feed the metadata into Turbo Vault, and that generates the Data Vault for DBT package YAML files. And then Iris is also a tool coming up, let's say a tool from Australia, based on REScape essentially under as far as I know. And they also, we're working together to get this done as well. So yeah, so that's the idea. So we integrate with these tools because they will then generate the physical model for you. It's just like Flowbia is a teammate, analyzing your source systems, knowing how to model a data vault, and knowing your tool, how to set up the metadata for your model inside your tool of choice. And that's the metadata essentially in a tool. So that's what I've done in the last years essentially. And again, we look at Francesco. When you have, so again, it's about a roundup of all these different concepts. When you have LLMs feeding data into, information marks feeding data or concepts into the LLM, we see this quite a few cases. So I've seen some projects where they have some similar stuff as well. They've often fed also data. So Francesco, he's more or less, correct me if I'm wrong, but you're focusing on the structure of the data or information. I've seen cases where they feed also the information itself into the LLM systems with quite some success actually. So we see this as well, and there's tools coming up in this regard as well.
Not only on structure, honestly.
Yeah, but you also have, you feed the information as well, okay.
Yeah, also like when I explain what is the potato business, that's
structure. Okay, perfect, yeah, okay. But again, we see some interesting tools popping up in this regard, and then also the assisting technology. I mean, years ago, the idea was there that an AI could only assist the data model in making decisions, right? And that's your approach to some extent to assist the user in identifying requirements, identifying report requirements or dimensions and so on. And that's what we see as well. So, I mean, this here looks at a different aspect, what, for example, Flowbia doesn't care for, right? So we don't care for the report requirements or information requirements. It's really on a different part, essentially. So different concepts we see and we saw in this conference here today and yesterday. So there's more and more common and more technologies and approaches popping up and will be used essentially in this regard to speed up, to become more agile, to speed up the generation process, but also to to establish more patterns, because when you use an LLM for querying your users, you follow patterns, right? You implement patterns essentially. How do you set up the requirements and so on? And what I like to define is essentially, I would like to evolve. So we started with the data-driven organization, but then I said, well, what about, I mean, data-driven organization is one thing, but what I want to turn this into or evolve into is an AI-driven business. I want to do business based on AI, essentially. And the way I would define this is essentially a data-driven organization, so it's based on a data-driven, that uses AI to integrate and process data flows, continuously identify and implement patterns in decision-making, and turn them into business-centric information flows, consumable by information users and AI models by all means necessary. So I don't care that there was also a discussion, can a data vault be used for pushing data only into reports and dashboards? But what about operation systems? Can we present information from a data warehouse in an operation system? And my clear answer is yes, because in a data-driven organization, I want to get information closer to the end user, to the decision maker, right? And I don't care if it's in reporting or dashboarding or an operation system, business process automation, and so on. No matter what, just get it to the closer to the decision maker so they can make decisions based on the information from these systems, essentially. And now this next step is to integrate using AI, maybe coming up with business rules based on AI patterns. There are patterns, I mean, AI is used for identifying patterns. And there are patterns in the business world as well. And there's some easy patterns and some more complicated patterns. You would not find one solution, AI solution, that captures everything. There will be many solutions that capture parts of the business logic. But that's the next step, in my opinion. And that's the decision-making or the identifying patterns in decision-making, essentially. All right. Now, what's our enemy, or not enemy, but the limiting factor, let's say that, regulations. And you know, a lot of them, when we deal with patient data, HIPAA, or consumer data, GDPR, or in California, CCPA, credit card data, health data, and so on. The Data Act and the AI Act as next regulations, essentially. I mean, you know the security privacy requirements from GDPR, from HIPAA, from CCPA, kind of similar, depending on what kind of data you're processing, patient data, consumer data. You have to be able to reduce those records, secure those records, and so on. So we deal with this all the time these days, and Data Vault has been designed for those cases, actually, because Dan had these problems, or these challenges, let's say, back in the 90s. And he solved it back in the 90s. That's why we have the satellite splits and how we deal with this by default. So that's by design, Data Vault. And then I stole a slide from Hernan here at Scalefree, where we had a presentation on the Data Act with our lawyers, actually, because that's what it is. Yeah, so where it's also about making sure that you have, as a consumer, have access to your own data, for example. That's more regulation, essentially. Same for AI Act, where we have to classify data mining systems. So you have to think about how to classify your approach here. And as long as you don't process any personal data, as long as you don't interfere in elections, it's all good, more or less. But once you start that, there's some, let's say, limited risk when you generate content, for example, right? When you have a chatbot that generates some content, you really want to think about, you have to declare that your content has been produced by AI, for example. So everybody knows this has been produced by AI, so I'm aware of that and I can make my decision based on this information, essentially. Or when your AI model is concerning regarding safety systems or law enforcement, children data, personal data, education, then it's considered as a high risk. And then it's not about transparency requirements anymore. You have to assess your system, have an assessment essentially, be able to publish this or give it to the EU, for example, to the regulator essentially. And then there's an unacceptable risk, which is essentially forbidden in the EU. Again, when you start thinking about influencing elections or social scoring, facial voice recognition to limit the capabilities of humans, essentially. That's the idea, to take over human decision-making, essentially, or influence human decisions. That's what's essentially not wanted, essentially. So those are limiting factors, essentially, that you have to be aware of. But how do we get started? So, I mean, you see this trend and this hype around large language models. And I like them, so I would not use them personally for building a raw data vault. Because in a raw data vault, when you would use a LLM to define a hub, for example, let's say a hub customer. You can ask ChatGPT to give me a structure for a hub customer. It will know and give you some hub customer, essentially, some create table statement or whatever. But the problem is it doesn't know if you have customer data inside your data set. So that's not going to work. It's just like you would build a raw data vault based on metadata from your sources only without looking at the data. That's not going to work. In a data-driven raw data vault, you have to drive the model based on data. That's what it is. So that's number one. And then large language models are just one form, one version of a foundational model. And foundational models produce content, images, text, data models, and so on, right? So FlowBear, for example, is based on a foundational model, for example, but also on other systems like mining models and so on. And I would distinguish here between two different approaches. Either you want to generate content, like text, images, or you want to make decisions and automate decisions. Those two I would essentially distinguish here, among others maybe, but I lack the experience with other approaches essentially. And for decision making, you also have two different approaches. You could have mining models. I'm a specialist for black box data mining, support vector machines, neural networks, and so on. But also expert systems, like more rule-based systems are also an interesting idea. So those two aspects I want to consider, and I would not try to solve everything using LLMs, for example. Because there's so many other approaches depending on what you want to do, decision making or content generation, I would use one or the other, essentially. And you want to monitor it. So you want to monitor the results, you want to monitor in order to maintain quality, essentially, right? And then the next steps for me would be, first of all, do your homework because you need to have data available, right? So you want to start with a data-driven organization first, so you can do AI, essentially. So because the AI-driven business is just an evolution of the data-driven organization. That's how I define it, essentially. Yeah. And then you want to look at the process. So if you want to automate decisions, in my opinion, it's helpful if you document it. Yes, a bit boring, but document your business processes, BPMN, business process model notation, because then you have all the decision points people make in your business processes. So it's good, indicate a good catalog to identify those decision points you want and you can automate using AI. So start building AI models for those decision points, essentially, in your business processes. Or identify opportunities for generating content. Where is content being generated inside your business processes, right? At Scalefree, for example, we have content generation embedded in our business processes. Where, well, when people want to switch positions, they have to document their work, essentially. Right? So you have to document, we have a wiki where you have to document. We have knowledge bases where people document their knowledge and so on. And it's part of the business process inside Scalefree, essentially. And that's what you want to consider as well. And then you could, once you know where content is being generated or documented or created, you can then start generating it. So you're looking systematically for those opportunities, essentially, right? And then you start automating those decision points where people make decisions manually. You start thinking about how is this decision being made? How can we automate this? And then distribute those models and the results. It's not just about building this model, it's also about making it available to decision makers or to processes, essentially. And govern it. Just like in data governance, you want to manage and govern AI models. You want to make sure they're up to date, they're producing the right results. So you want to continue to test them. You want to improve model results over time, right? And transparent reporting. So you want to give some feedback or some report about the quality of the results of the decisions made to improve them as well. That's that's a process we typically use, essentially. Any questions? Oh, good timing.
Thank you, Michael, for the presentation. Wonderful, very exciting, scary. Every time we speak about AI. There's a question that I have, but I had it for a long time. Like when I saw the synopsis of your speech, I said, I hope I will have a microphone to ask you this question. What does Don Linstead think about this thing of AI automation?
What's done? Okay, yeah. So, I have two answers here. The first one is because your scariness. I want to take that away. Okay. You see this line chart here, right? So don't be scared of AI. Not this one. Well, this you should be scared. Less people, right? because that means that the growth model will come to an end. But this one, you shouldn't be scared, because don't be scared about AI. You're in a data profession here, essentially, and the gap between the data shape that we have to process and the people is widening. So AI will only help us dealing with the gap, but there's a lot of work to be done. Maybe your work shifts a bit back and forth, but that's what it is. So I wouldn't be scared here in this environment about AI, to be honest. There are other jobs where people are more scared and they have the reason to be scared, but then, yeah, it's what it is. But then, honestly, people were scared about cars when they got introduced because they were louder than Kutschen. What's Kutschen? I don't know. Yeah. They were scared about computers. When computers came in, everybody was scared that everybody gets unemployed. But yeah, it's still a lucky shortage of people since then. So I wouldn't be scared. So that's the first part. Second part is I had a discussion with Dan. I showed him data Flow BI. We developed this under the hood for years, right? So at least 3 years where I didn't talk to anybody except a couple of people like Christoph New at Scalefree, but didn't talk to Dan actually. And I presented this idea to Dan before his last conference. I quote his saying. He said to me, I knew the day would come. That's what he said, essentially. Yeah.
So positive. Okay.
Yeah, that was the statement. Yeah.
It's not actually a serious question, it's a bit tongue-in-cheek. Is Data Dreamer going to evolve into a conference for AI-driven business?
I mean, the name must change, right? No, we don't know, so we haven't planned it. Yeah. Yeah. I think there's a question here or something. Yeah.
Hey, first, thank you very much for this slide. I will show it to my boss and ask him for
raise.
exponential increase in my rate. Thank you very much. My second question is, because for, let's say, last 12 months, I'm having so many pre-sales calls with potential customers about the AI. I can see that how the mood about the AI is changing from absolutely excitement
Yep.
into the more realistic.
Yeah.
Do you believe that the AI and the excitement from the AI can start dropping even more, and that all our discussions about how to make our data more AI usable will somehow become less relevant?
Sorry, the data vault becomes less relevant?
No, I mean, all our effort about having AI-ready data will become less relevant.
I would say this. So first of all, we came out of the under the radar environment with Flow BI because when ChatGPT started hitting the industry last year, we were sitting there and said, okay, I told the team we have to get public with this, what we're building here, because now is the time. People understand what we're doing. But because we're generating data models essentially. So not text, not images, but data models. So people understand what Flow BI does. But on the other hand, to be honest, I don't fully understand the hype of AI, to be honest, because if you think this is something new, well, wake up. I've done research in 2009. 2009, I completed my studies, and then it was already an old topic. What has changed back then is quite simple. As a student, I was sitting at these conferences, like this conference here. I was a student volunteer a lot, so I volunteered at these IEEE conferences, and because I had to pay for the flight, but then free hotel in Minneapolis and stay and everything, right? So the only thing I had to do is sit at a registration desk and hand out these tags and that kind of stuff, right? And that's it. And I remember there were these guys from conferences just like you, and they were all going for the students. Why? Because they need more people, right? This gap already. And I was doing research on distributing neural networks on MVP clusters, and that was the research topic back then in 2009, because that changed. These neural networks are from the, 60s. That's when the basic algorithms started. What has changed in 2007 was the data volume that they wanted to analyze. And for that, they needed to be able to distribute neural networks, support vector machines on MVP clusters. That was the big research topic back then. So all these big firms that you know, search engines and so on, they looked at the data, at the students back there at these conferences, who to hire. And I had the right research topic. The only problem what I had was I had a scholarship. and I had to, when I got the scholarship, I had to sign that I'm coming back to Germany for 2 years at least. And yeah, my girlfriend was there, and my later wife, and I founded a company, so I stick here. I'm stuck, right? This is what it is. But seriously, if you give somebody money to attend school in foreign country, you would expect that from the government that you have signed a contract and they come back, right? Because otherwise, that's a waster. So I couldn't say yes. I had to go back. Essentially, I said no to all these offerings that I received, and so that changed actually the volume of data we're processing, the volume of data we're able to process, and that's a big difference. But they solved this problem around 2010, 2011 already. And since 10 years, they're using these algorithms to analyze your data for all the better of 10 years. So if you think this is new, wake up, it's old topic already. So we're doing this all the time. And Google wouldn't work without AI. That's what it is. What's changed is the awareness that you can do this, that the algorithms are widely available, much easier to be used in the cloud, for example, and so on. So it's much easier to use, and that's the only difference. But the algorithms exist for a long time already. So I forgot your question, but I think I roughly answered it. Yeah.
How do you envision to monetize Flow AI? Is it going to be like a one-time setup fee, a subscription or something?
So,
first question, and second is, can it work? Do you plan to have it deployable inside a customer's like private environment because of data security?
Yeah. So first answer is the pricing is essentially so I have two price models in mind. One is the fixed price project where you just generate a model and then when you're done you leave, right? Maybe for data migration where you just want to create some model, attach all the data sources into a raw data vault and then derive the new target model for your SAP S4 or whatever and the job is done and then you can dump the model essentially. You don't need that anymore. And then the other model is the enterprise data warehouse or the data platform where you attach data sources and you want to maintain them. So in Flow BI, everything is historized. So think about this. Flow BI is a big data solution to generate big data solutions. That's what it is. And we have a repository where we store metadata. And this repository is based on a data warehouse concept called Data Vault. So we have all the, guess what? So we have all the changes of your incoming metadata from the source systems, when columns have been added and removed and so on, when tables have been added. We have all the changes, all the history of all the decisions we made, and all the results we produced. So we have everything is historized based on data vault concepts. And that's great. So we can produce a logical model day by day. Whenever you hit the red button, even on a scheduled basis, we create a new model. If there's a change, you just process it. So it's not just about creating the model with tens of source systems, but also maintaining the model essentially. And that's the subscription model. So there's two different price aspects essentially in the pricing. And it's scalable. So the pricing model is really about the effort we have. We have more effort, the more data shape you have, the more tables, the more columns you have, and the more data volume you have. So if that goes up, the price goes up because that's directly related to my effort essentially. So that's a pricing model. The second part regarding the on-premise installation, we are cloud native, so we start in the cloud. It's a SaaS service where you can attach your data source in the cloud. On the other hand, design-wise, all the data mining models we have built by ourselves. So we're not depending on any external APIs, ChatGPT, that stuff. No. First of all, it's not an LLM, that's number one, but we don't depend on any external APIs. Everything is built by ourselves. And everything is, So it's by design, and we use only components from the cloud where we knew they are running on-premise as well. So that's by design. The only thing is we're not there. And it's not my favorite business because first of all, Flowbase is not a application you install or something on a server. It's an appliance that comes with clusters. Everything is MVP based. And we spin up clusters. I believe we build like, depending on how you define it, at least 6 or 7 different MVP clusters ourselves, plus MVP clusters like S3 and Redis cache and so on. So different clusters we use essentially. So a total of 11, 12 clusters we have to deploy essentially, right? In the cloud, we can auto-balance them. So if we have more demands, we just scale them up and down, right? So so you have a cost aspect. When we put this into your basement, we're looking at least at 2 different outpost clusters, 30 grand a month.
Yeah,
that's what it is. Sorry.
I'm talking about on-prem, but like in a customer's cloud environment. Like you could deploy this into their AWS account.
Yeah, what we think about, so what's easy to design is bring your own bucket. So instead of storing your data, you could bring your own bucket and we store the data in your bucket, for example. That kind of stuff. And that could reside in your environment.
Just to
That's
get
easy.
around like a limitation,
Mhm.
you're potentially scanning confidential
Yeah.
information, and but just getting around that and
Yep.
saying, well, it runs in your instance.
Yep.
We package it, we deploy it.
Yeah.
It's stored, all intermediate results are
Yeah.
stored in your bucket,
Yeah.
so you don't have any problem with compliance.
Yeah. So first of all, in my opinion, organizations they use also cloud database like Snowflake and so on. It's already there. I get it. Snowflake is not Flowbase, not Snowflake, right? Flowbase is a startup, so that's what it is. So it's all about legal agreements first of all. So there must be a data processing agreement in place and so on. That's number one. And but we could talk about stuff like bring your own bucket. But at the moment, we could. Yeah, the design is really a shared infrastructure where we distribute everything by, it's a multi-tenant environment where everything is separated by tenant, by instance, there's different separations. And but it's a shared environment. That's what it is at the moment. Yeah, I wouldn't rule out the other stuff, but like a more deployed environment, but we're not there yet. And I'm not sure if I want to go that route, so let's see. Yeah. Any other question?
Okay, thank
Cool.
you very